All right. So,
Yeah,
well, thank
it
you for
is.
being on the show.
Yes, thank you.
Give us some background about you. Introduce yourself.
Okay, so I'm Irasema Rocha. I am a tax attorney. I have a lot of knowledge with small businesses and helping them seek opportunities. I've done also a lot of payroll reporting, which is the base of the ERC. So I'm very familiar with all sorts of payroll reports and the different services that you can use, like ADP, Centric, and all of those. So if you ever have a question on a new software program that runs payroll, come to me. I'm really good at that.
We have. That's what we do. We go to you. Exactly.
Yes. So, and I really just like to help small businesses. I'm a first-generation American, and most of my family came here with a dream, and they all have managed to, make it happen.
Well, I met your mother.
You
was
did.
A huge inspiration.
She's amazing.
Talk about your mom, because her story is so cool. I just love it. I know it's not on topic of the podcast, but it's still such an awesome story.
Yes. So she came to America in the 80s, and she actually stayed illegally. But now she is full-blown citizen.
Okay.
And she started working at a Denny's. And from there, she found her passion for food and started a small catering company, and now is a federal service contractor for the Department of Defense, and she does airline catering.
Yeah. No, I know she's huge. She's a huge player in the market.
Yes.
She dominates.
She dominates. If your aircraft lands at Fort Bliss, you're military, you have to go through her.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
Well, thank you for that. And, as you're going through your credentials, you hit on some important things. The topic is ERC. And I think a good starting point is first identifying who are the players in the market. Because if you go on your LinkedIn, if you turn on the radio, everyone is doing ERC. Everyone is an ERC specialist. They hold themselves out as ERC specialists. So, what's the market look like? Where does a law firm come in versus a CPA firm versus an ERC specialist? Maybe that would be helpful for the market to understand sort of what is happening in this space, because it's a newer space, but it's been crammed, right?
Some people refer to it as the ERTC as well. So, Employee Retention Credit. The way the credit works is that it's an amendment on your Forms 941, and technically anyone can file this amendment. So that is why we have so many what they call the ERC mills, who are just, people who were selling timeshares last year, and now they're these credit experts who, run some calculations and think that they can get anybody qualified.
No, we've seen some of those applications where we have to look at them, make sure that they actually qualified, and they're basically written in crayon.
Exactly.
It's pretty.
And, you'll get the money, you'll get the refund, but then when the audit comes through, they're going to be looking at this very, very closely.
Where does it come from? And sort of the origin from the beginning of ERC or the Employee Retention Credit to where we are today. Because it wasn't a offering initially that you could receive if you took a payroll protection loan, right? It was either PPP or it was ERC in the alternative.
Yes. Well, back in 2020, when the world was in chaos, the Congress said, okay, we're going to try to give, some relief to employers. And they gave two options, as you said, the PPP loan and then this employee retention credit. And back then, I remember reading the rules in 2020 and thinking, what is this? I even talked to a CPA and they're like, well, it's so new, I don't know. And it didn't seem like it was going to be that fruitful anyways. So everyone was going for these PPP loans because it was, cash in your pocket right away.
And it was user-friendly too. So
it was so easy.
Your CPA could come in, your comptroller, they could prepare the paperwork, you'd run it through your local bank.
Yeah.
It was a seamless product.
So easy. You didn't even need a CPA, really. You just needed to get in touch with your bank, and they would almost do everything for you.
Yeah, very
true. It was so easy. So then that happened, and obviously COVID continued. So they said, okay, let's give employers the opportunity to also seek this credit, even though they also sought the PPP. And they do work together, but there is a rule that you can't double dip wages used. that to seek PPP forgiveness to also get the ERC, which is one of the reasons why the mills, you have to be careful when you use a mill, because they don't allocate properly when they run the credit.
Well, it's a very sophisticated analysis, and you raise a good point, because I think a lot of companies are under the misconception where it's, we received PPP, therefore I cannot submit to ERC, right? My application is null and void, and that's not the reality. The reality is you can still move forward with an ERC application. However, PPP is a factor that goes into that application. And exactly. To a finer point that you were making is, if you're going to have that analysis conducted, you better make sure that the person really understands how that PPP is allocated into your application overall, correct?
Exactly. And we even have some clients who tried to run the credit themselves. And when considering PPP wages, they were like, oh, well, I just did a dollar for dollar reduction. But they didn't take into consideration like the PPP forgiveness rules themselves. For example, like if someone makes more than $100,000 a year, then the amount of wages that can be allocated to them for PPP forgiveness purposes shrinks substantially.
Right, which is a huge danger, right? So you have someone who's a non-lawyer who really doesn't understand this area of the law come in and just botches the analysis. And you said it something earlier, which is, I think, very important, is just because you botch the application doesn't mean you're not going to get the money. The money will likely come in. The issue is on the back end, and that really is where the danger is. Now, interestingly enough, Linda Honey, who helps oversee this department at the firm.
Wonderful woman.
She was featured in an Inc. magazine article where she really identifies not only the dangers associated with the ERC mills, but also the IRS rightfully is really cracking down on this industry.
Yes. In October, the IRS just issued, it's not a notice, a formal notice, but if you go to their website, you can find it. It was an IR. They call it IR, which is my initials. That's why I don't forget. And they talk about the ERC mills. They say, taxpayers beware. There's a lot of people out there who are just going to file the credit, file it wrong, calculate it wrong, give you the money, take 20% or sometimes 30%, and then they're going to be gone, when audit comes around, and you're still going to be on the hook.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So the company is feeling really good. And I don't fault the companies, because it is a very difficult field to navigate if you're a consumer, right? You see a commercial ERC specialist, it looks very sharp, and you say, oh, 26 grand per employee, that sounds phenomenal. You call them, and they have a very well-oiled sales machine that hooks you in. You sign the agreement at, let's say, 20 to 30%, and let's say they procure $1 million. $1 million comes into the company minus the 20%. Now you're at 800 grand. Now, 2 years or a year down the road, IRS is going to come in, look at that application, say, why is it written in crayon? They should have never received these funds. Now, the issue becomes, I think, twofold. One, they're going to want the full $1 million back. So that presupposes the company kept the 800,000. The 200 grand is now offshore somewhere that you're never going to find. But now they're going to tack on interest, penalties. I mean, it really is putting these companies that have already struggled or powered through a pandemic in a horrific situation.
It is, and it's awful that they're just out there doing that and that people aren't aware of so many dangers. One of the biggest issues that I see when seeing the work that they provide is issues in aggregation.
Speak to aggregation. Yes. I think this is a very gray area. Most people really don't understand it, but it's not overly complex.
Yes, and a quick way to sum up aggregation is, depending on the ownership of any business, you could be considered a single employer with more businesses depending on the parties that own it. So let's say, even in a small example, you have a restaurant, and it's one owner, it's an S Corp. They, report on their 1040, Schedule K ones, and they also have a small LLC. And the LLC is just passive income. Maybe they rent out the restaurant space to themselves.
Right.
And they would have qualified for the credit really easily by showing that they had a decrease in revenue. However, they didn't realize that because of aggregation, they had to include their revenue from their LLC together, which now maybe disqualifies them in that way. So that's a big one. And that's in a small sense, but we've had bigger clients who have, 20 entities, 30 entities.
ran
And that's
some-
a huge, huge difference.
Hey, you've done some massive aggregation.
Yes. And actually, this is the sad part. I call it the sound of the price going down. The big rule with aggregation is that, okay, you get everyone together, you qualify for the credit, but you're maxed out per employee. So if you gave that same employee, let's say your employee, you have 10 companies that one employee received 10 W-2s, they're maxed out. So those companies, the mill would run like $26,000 per employee per entity, but it was actually maxed out. So you have to do a double dip analysis, is what we call it, and make sure that you run all the names, socials together to see who is in multiple entities, and that kills I don't want to say kills completely, but it does really.
It impacts the credit.
Yeah, I've seen
ultimately.
it like go down like $3 million.
Yeah.
Just with one quarter.
But rightfully though, so you're doing, because it's not, the aggregation analysis is it's so much heavy lifting, and there's so much precision that's required in that, and it's interesting to really think that really people who don't understand this space are putting these together.
It's so sad.
It's unsettling.
It really is. It really is. There's so much fraud out there, or even related party wages. Like you'll have a small business that maybe they only had 9 employees, but guess what? Like 4 of them are related to the owner, the majority owner. None of those wages qualify anymore.
So another topic, which there's a lot of confusion, and this is sort of where I see a lot of CPAs not fully understanding the amendments to the CARES Act, is how does a company qualify? Because when you speak to a lot of CPAs, it's a financial product that they deliver. So oftentimes their understanding of the ERC program is specifically gauged to profitability. And countless companies have come to us and said, hey, I spoke with my CPA, we were profitable, and we absolutely don't qualify. But that's not the whole analysis. There's another part of the amendment which also speaks to how a company may be able to get on the dance floor, as they say.
Yes. And the way that you can qualify, again, significant decline, number one, revenue loss, very easy to assess looking at it.
That's black and white.
Yeah.
You get the abacus out, you run the analysis, boom, qualification.
Boom, exactly. And so to qualify for the other way, which is suspension, you have to show that there was a more than nominal suspension to some source of revenue or employee hours during COVID that can tie back to a government order. So the requirements for that is first a government order that's in place that you can say, hey, because of this order, I wasn't able to operate fully, completely, or partially. And the way that we run that analysis is that we go back to your 2019 numbers. Again, for the ERC, 2019 is the base of everything. So unfortunately for those people who did bad in 2019, and maybe it's really hard to qualify if 2019 was a bad year for you. I hate to say that, but it's true. But anyways, so you go back to your 2019 numbers and you say, and it's a quarterly analysis, since it is an amendment on your Form 941. We run analysis by quarter. You say, okay, taking the restaurant example, the IRS loves this example. It's very clear to, conceptualize.
No, I love the restaurant analysis because everyone can get their head around that very easily.
Very nicely. So the way it is, like restaurants did great during the pandemic, but they didn't do great in all aspects. A lot of restaurants had to close out indoor dining. As we recall, there was limited seating. Maybe they just did wonderful because there was takeout, or outdoor dining.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because really the ERC program is meant to reward those dynamic companies that powered through the pandemic. And the restaurant industry specifically, they got hit so hard with those orders. The order said, hey, no more indoor dining. So they became very dynamic. It's outdoor dining. They now have DoorDash. They ramped up those sales. And then some even opened up small, like gourmet grocery stores. It was very clever.
Well, they even changed the alcohol. The laws in California changed about alcohol, and to-go alcohol is now a source, and that was because of COVID.
Right, and the really savvy business owners of those restaurants really embraced it. And so from an economic standpoint, they did very well. But they had to pivot, and they had to work very hard, and now they're getting a refund for that hard work.
Exactly. You're not going to get, unrewarded for doing good.
Right. So you survived. You're not going to get penalized for that.
Exactly. And the government is saying, thank you for helping during, such an awful time. Unemployment rates were skyrocketing. So they're saying, hey.
No, they were the backbone to the economy.
Yes.
So if you qualify, it's a tremendous program. But I think the bottom line is, it's a federal program. You have to take it with a tremendous amount of care. You have to be serious about it. And, if a company doesn't qualify, you are absolutely doing a disservice if you try to get them qualified.
Exactly.
Don't waste their time. It's just going to put them in hardship down the road.
And that's why we don't go through with any application. We're not, 100% on our...
And you shouldn't be. Any company that says I can qualify 100% is like you are doing a horrific disservice.
Exactly. And we've had to reject people. Again, 2019, if they did bad, some people just happen to do exceptionally well in 2020. And it's, it's sad to see it, but we only go forward with the ones that we can actually point back and show records, evidence of how it impacted you.
This is how every firm, anyone who's in this space should be operating, period. And I'm actually very happy that the IRS is doing what they're doing. They are inserting themselves in the right way, and they're really targeting, in my mind, a cancer on this industry or this space.
It's taking advantage of people who already worked so hard.
Exactly. One last thing I want to talk about is ERC shelf life.
Okay, yes.
How much longer is it available? What are we looking at in terms? I know there's some changes coming up, so maybe if you want to hit both targets.
Yes. So the way the ERC, again, it's an amendment to your 941 return, and you have 3 years from the date of filing. For most people, that means that the first deadline, so the deadline will stagger from the first filing in 2020 to 2021. The first deadline coming up for most will be in April of this year. However, those are for wages that were paid after March 12th, 2020 through March 31st, 2020. So if you want to qualify for those wages, you have until April to do so. And then it'll keep going 3 months and 3 months.
Got
after that. And then the audit on this is going to be very heavy. The IRS specifically changed the audit process for these claims for quarter 3 of 2021 to 5 years as opposed to 3.
Well, to me, that was a reaction to what happened in the PPP space. So many people took advantage of it and defrauded the IRS, through this program. So it almost seemed like a necessary backstop in anticipation of, again, fraud, and I think they called it.
They did.
They called it without question.
I know, and even us, when we see some applications, we even see the errors in the PPPs too. So you get a double dip when you come to us in that sense, because a lot of people didn't know what they were doing. And they also, to harp on the PPP thing, a lot of people relied on their payroll software to extrapolate the formula for forgiveness wages, and that software is very faulty. And if you see their spreadsheets, it'll say this is not legal advice by any means. So also, on a note, please double check your PPP forgiveness apps and make sure that those forgiveness wages were calculated.
That's a good point. I mean,
properly.
You are being sought after for PPP audits. That's kind of ramping up in your world.
Yes.
Is it not?
Yes, it is. And there's so much to, and you'd be surprised how many people transitioned payroll companies during COVID.
Yeah, they did.
So many. And we've had it to where you see, if it's a mid-quarter transition, they accidentally, the software, inputted all of the year-to-date earnings in one quarter. So it seemed like they had significant amount of wages during that quarter during the covered period, but it wasn't. So it was wrong.
Yeah, and you can confirm this, but a technical glitch is not going to be an affirmative defense. To a PPP audit.
No, I mean, you see those attestations on your 3508 form, and it's I attest to the wages. There's no fraud, and so be careful with us too. With everything you're doing with the IRS, we take a long time. It took me 6 hours once just to double check a couple returns because I had to make sure that everything.
Well, it also
perfect.
raises another point. You're a fiduciary to your clients.
Exactly.
So that's a huge difference when it comes to our relationship with or any law firm, right? Any law firm that's really in the space and taking it seriously as they should. Those are fiduciaries to the client, right? So
Exactly.
the standard of care is through the roof.
It is.
As it should be, but...
And it's my taxpayer prepare number also. So I'm
Right.
very careful, like, hey, double whammy. Like, I make sure that everything, and we also offer the supporting memo, which is very nice, where we cite all the rules, the exact orders if you do qualify through the suspension, because we do an exhaustive analysis of every OSHA order, state, county, anything that was available at the time, because that's the rule when you qualify through that way, is
Right.
that there had to be an active order
Right.
in place to get the credit.
You're helping people sleep at night because they have the backstop. They have the
Exactly.
homework that you did.
Yes.
You can show your work.
Oh,
That's what they
yes,
used to say at
yes.
school. So,
Yes, yes.
well, thank you. You're doing phenomenal work.
Okay, well, thank you.
Any final words?
Beware. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Come to us.
Do you want
We
to...
really love this. It's fun. I mean, I'm one of the few people that actually has a blast running these numbers. It's a lot of fun,
Well,
and to help people.
Well, like I
It feels
said,
great.
You're doing tremendous work. So thank you.
Okay,
and
thank you
look forward
for
to having you
having
back
me.
on the show
Yes.
again.